167 people were loaded onto boats and told they'd be home in a few weeks. They never came back. In March 1946, Commodore Ben Wyatt stood before the people of Bikini Atoll and asked them to leave their homeland for the good of mankind and to end all world wars. King Judah, the community's leader, reportedly said his people would go, trusting the Americans as they might trust God. What Judah didn't know, what wouldn't become clear for decades, was that this promise was already a lie. The Bikinians were moved first to Rongerik Atoll, a place half the size of their home and considered uninhabitable by the Marshallese themselves. Old stories called Rongerik cursed. Its coconut trees were said to produce poisonous fruit. The fish near its reefs carried ciguatera toxin. None of this mattered to the Navy planners, who needed an empty proving ground. They had bombs to test and a new world order to build, and 167 islanders were simply in the way. On July 1st, 1946, a B-29 named Dave's Dream dropped a 23-kiloton atomic bomb over a fleet of 95 target ships anchored in Bikini's lagoon. The test was called Able. Journalists and military observers watched from ships nearby. Congressmen attended. It was a spectacle, the world's first televised nuclear explosion. 25 days later came Baker. This one detonated underwater 90 feet beneath the surface of the lagoon. A column of water 2,000 feet across and a mile high erupted from the sea, lifting battleships like toys. The spray deposited intensely radioactive water across the entire target fleet. Cleanup crews scrubbed decks with soap and lye water. It didn't work. Ship after ship had to be scuttled or sunk because the contamination couldn't be removed. The Navy had learned something important about nuclear fallout, and they learned it the hard way. But the lesson they took wasn't caution. It was curiosity. While the Navy celebrated its scientific triumph, the Bikinians on Rongerik were starving. The atoll couldn't support them. The coconut palms produced too little. The fish made people sick. By 1948, a visiting doctor found the community in desperate condition, malnourished, and demoralized. They were moved again, this time to Kwajalein, where they lived in tents beside a military runway, then to Kili Island, a small dot of land with no lagoon, no protected fishing waters, and punishing surf that cut them off from supply ships for months at a time. Meanwhile, the tests continued. Operation Sandstone in 1948, Operation Greenhouse in 1951. The proving ground expanded to include Enuitak Atoll, whose people were also relocated. Each series of tests grew larger. Each one deposited more fallout across the Marshall Islands. But what was happening on the atolls downwind? That story was only beginning. On March 1st, 1954, the United States detonated Castle Bravo on Bikini Atoll. It was a thermonuclear bomb, and its designers expected a yield of roughly 6 megatons. They got 15. The explosion was 2.5 times larger than predicted, the most powerful nuclear device the United States ever detonated. Its fireball stretched nearly 5 miles across. The mushroom cloud climbed to 130,000 feet and spread for hundreds of miles. Radioactive fallout, white powdery ash, began drifting east. It fell on Rongerik Atoll, 65 miles away, where 86 people lived. It fell on Utirik, 300 miles away. Children on Rongerik played in the ash. They ate it. It accumulated in their hair, on their skin, in their drinking water. The fallout was so thick it looked like snow. Within hours, people began vomiting. Their skin burned, their hair fell out, but no evacuation came, not for 2 days. On Utirik, it took 3. The question that would haunt the Marshallese for generations was brutally simple. Did the Americans know? They knew. Declassified documents revealed that within hours of the Bravo detonation, military weather stations tracked the fallout cloud moving directly toward inhabited atolls. The wind patterns were known before the shot. Some researchers have argued the test should have been postponed. It wasn't. What followed was Project 4.1. A classified medical study with a title that read like a lab report, Study of Response of Human Beings Exposed to Significant Beta and Gamma Radiation Due to Fallout from High-Yield Weapons. The exposed populations of Rongelap and Utirik were not treated as victims. They were treated as subjects. American doctors arrived, took blood samples, conducted examinations, and meticulously documented symptoms. They returned year after year, tracking thyroid abnormalities, leukemia rates, stillbirths, and developmental disorders in children. But the Marshallese weren't told what was wrong with them. They weren't told what the ash had been. They were told they were receiving medical care. A 1956 Atomic Energy Commission report described the Marshallese as providing data, gruesome as it may be, that could not be obtained any other way. The people of Rongelap had become, in the language of the Commission's own scientists, the most valuable fallout-exposed population on Earth. In 1957, the Atomic Energy Commission declared Rongelap safe, and the people were sent home. Internal documents, declassified years later, showed that officials knew radiation levels on the atoll remained dangerously high. A Brookhaven National Laboratory report noted that Rongelap offered an opportunity to study human beings living in a contaminated environment, a setting gruesome in what it permitted researchers to observe but impossible to replicate in a laboratory. The Rongelapese ate local food. They drank rainwater collected from contaminated surfaces. They fished in their lagoon, and the American doctors kept coming, year after year, drawing blood, measuring thyroids, recording the data. Thyroid tumors appeared at extraordinary rates. Women gave birth to what they called jellyfish babies, translucent, boneless infants who lived only hours. Miscarriage rates soared. Cancer moved through the community like weather. The people asked to leave for years. Their requests went unanswered. It wasn't until 1985 that the Rongelapese finally evacuated, not with American help, but aboard the Rainbow Warrior, a Greenpeace vessel, to the empty atoll of Mehato. They rescued themselves because no one else would. Between 1946 and 1958, the United States detonated 67 nuclear weapons in the Marshall Islands. The combined explosive yield was equivalent to 7,200 Hiroshima bombs. Calculated across the 12 years of testing, that works out to more than 1.5 Hiroshimas per day, every day, for over a decade, all on a territory the size of Washington, D.C. In 1986, the Compact of Free Association established a $150 million trust fund as compensation. The Nuclear Claims Tribunal, set up to process individual claims, eventually awarded over $2 billion in damages. The United States funded only a fraction. As of today, most of those awards remain unpaid. The Bikinians have never permanently returned to Bikini. Rongelap remains largely uninhabited. Enuetaks people went home to an atoll where radioactive soil was scraped into a concrete dome, the Runit Dome, now cracking and threatened by rising seas. The Marshallese didn't just lose their land. They lost their food systems, their navigation traditions, their burial grounds, their connection to the ocean that had defined their civilization for 2,000 years. A culture built on water was poisoned by it. The children of Rongelap and Bikini now live scattered across the Pacific and in cities like Springdale, Arkansas, and Salem, Oregon. Many carry the medical consequences of exposure in their bodies: thyroid scars, cancer histories, the genetic uncertainty of wondering what was passed down. The Marshallese word for their experience is korkor, a slow, consuming grief. No American president has formally apologized. No official reclassification of the Marshallese as nuclear test victims, comparable to downwinders in Nevada or atomic veterans, has been enacted at the federal level. The Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, which covered Americans exposed to fallout on U.S. soil, excluded the Marshallese entirely until advocacy efforts pushed for its expansion decades later. What happened at Bikini Atoll was not an accident. It was not a miscalculation. It was a program, deliberate, documented, and sustained across 12 years, in which an entire people were moved, exposed, studied, and then left to manage the consequences alone. The ash fell like snow, and the children played in it, and the scientists wrote it down. That record exists. It sits in archives in Washington and in the scarred thyroids of grandmothers on Mehato and in the cracking concrete of a dome on Runit Island that holds the remains of a promise no one ever intended to keep.